Hey,
Personalize
what is up,
iPhone in ways
guys?
that work.
Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our Making Accessible Apps for Apple Platforms series, and in this particular video we are going to be taking a look at how we can how we can make iOS more accessible. Um, Now, this is going to be pretty much an overview of the different accessibility settings on iOS. Um, these are also available on iPadOS, and iPadOS has perhaps a few more accessibility features that you can try out, including eye tracking, which is really cool. Um, and then after this, in the next video, we'll take a look at the accessibility settings for the Apple Watch. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by exploring the accessibility settings on the iPhone. So if we go down,
Vision heading.
our first section is for vision. So this section has accessibility settings relating to blindness, low vision, color blindness, stuff like that.
VoiceOver on button.
So the first setting that we have here is VoiceOver. Now, VoiceOver has a wide range of different settings, from different settings for the actual screen reader itself. I believe this is in iOS 18. There is a new VoiceOver training, which is helpful if you're unfamiliar with VoiceOver. I also have a video on my channel that I did a while ago describing the basics of how to get started with using VoiceOver on iOS, so you can also check that out as well. The VoiceOver section contains also settings for Braille displays. So, for example, if you need to use a different Braille table for a different language, or you don't want to use grade 2 Braille or something like that, those kinds of settings are in there as well.
Zoom on button.
Now, zoom, this setting contains settings related to zoom. So if we go
Settings.
in,
Zoom.
so if we
Switch
go
button
in
on.
there, there's not very
Double tap to
many in
toggle
here,
setting.
but there are some. So right now I have zoom enabled.
Zoom magnifies the entire screen. Double tap 3 fingers to zoom. Drag 3 fingers to move around. Double tap 3 fingers and drag to change zoom.
So you can see there's some instructions for how to use zoom.
Follow focus. Switch button off. Double tap to toggle
You can
setting.
have zoom follow your focus. So if you go into a text field to edit, the zoom will automatically focus on that field. Sometimes it's useful, other times it's just flat out annoying when your focus constantly changes and it's very jarring.
Screen dimmed.
So I typically have that turned off.
Keyboard shortcuts on button.
We have keyboard shortcuts for zoom enabled as well.
Zoom controller off button.
We have zoom
Zoom region.
controller,
Full screen zoom
zoom
button.
region. So this will tell you, do you want it to be part of the screen that's magnified and follows when you pan, or do you want the entire screen, stuff like
Zoom
that.
filter none button.
There are some zoom filters.
Show while mirroring. Switch button off. Double tap to
Show
toggle
while
setting.
mirroring. I believe this is a new setting that was introduced in iOS 18 because of the mirroring stuff between iOS and macOS.
Controls whether zoom appears while sharing your screen and during screen recordings. Maximum zoom level. Heading. Maximum zoom level. 5.0.
So
Accessibility. Back button. Accessibility. Back button. VoiceOver. On. Zoom. Display and text size. Button.
We have a bunch of settings for display and text size.
Bold text.
So
Switch
in
button.
here, we can set our text to be bold.
Larger text. Off. Button.
We can use larger accessibility sizes for dynamic type. So if you're not familiar with dynamic type allows you to increase or decrease the font size depending on what you find most comfortable. For low vision users, they generally have their text pretty big if they're not using VoiceOver, and sometimes if they are using VoiceOver. And if they need it even bigger than what iOS provides by default, then they can enable
Larger
the
text.
larger
Off. Button.
text setting
Button shapes. Switch
to
button.
get
Off.
larger
Double
accessibility
tap to toggle setting.
sizes. There's button shapes, so you can draw like the shape of your button or the tap target around your button to kind of let people know where one button ends and another begins and stuff like that. To make it a little bit easier on them.
On/off labels. Switch button. Off.
There's
Double tap to
on/off
toggle setting.
labels to help people indicate whether a switch is on or off without having to rely on color alone.
Reduce transparency. Switch button. Off.
Now, reduce transparency.
Double tap to toggle setting.
What is reduce transparency? Well, this essentially reduces not only the transparency of many elements to none or very, very little, but it also removes or diminishes blur effects to help make contrast a little bit more distinct, a little bit easier to read.
Improve contrast by reducing transparency and blurs on some backgrounds to increase legibility. Increase contrast. Switch button. Off.
Now,
Double tap to toggle
contrast allows you to do exactly what it sounds like. Increase the contrast of your display. So that way, while something might meet the web content accessibility guidelines setting, or rather their guidance for what is an acceptable contrast ratio, perhaps the user still needs the contrast to go even further than that. So that's what this setting is for.
Increase color contrast between app foreground and background colors. Differentiate without color. Switch button. Off.
Now,
Double tap to toggle setting.
Without color is a setting for colorblind users where when enabled, you will have an easier time being able to differentiate between different controls without using color.
Replaces user interface items that rely solely on color to convey information with alternatives. Prefer horizontal text. Switch button. Off. Prefer horizontal text in languages that support vertical text.
Okay. So I prefer horizontal text. You heard what that does.
Smart invert. Switch button. Off. Double
now
tap
we
to
have
toggle
smart
setting.
invert and classic invert. Smart invert, as it says, tries to be a little bit more intelligent about what it inverts and what it doesn't. If you're in an app and you have smart invert enabled, it will try to invert, for example, text and background colors, colors
Screen
of
dim.
buttons, stuff like that. But sometimes it'll do the buttons and the text. Sometimes it won't. It will do the text fields. But it does not do images. So it keeps those intact. Now, classic invert just inverts all the colors of the display. That's exactly what that does. There's nothing too special about it.
Smart invert reverses the colors of the display. Classic invert. Switch button. Classic invert reverses the colors of the display. Color filters. Off. Color filters can be used to differentiate colors by users who are colorblind and aid users who have difficulty reading text on the display.
So as it just said, color filters helps people with color blindness and helps to make things a little bit more legible.
Reduce white point. Switch button. Off.
Now, reduce white point helps to reduce eye strain by reducing the brightness of and vibrancy of certain colors.
Reduce the intensity of bright colors. Auto brightness. Switch button. Off.
Now,
double
auto
tap to toggle setting.
Also helps with eye strain to reduce the brightness of the display, but this also has a nifty side effect where it helps battery life as well. So you kind of get the idea of these display and text size
accessibility
settings.
Back button. Accessibility back zoom on button. Display and text motion button.
Now motion
button.
there
Reduce
are a few
motion.
things
Switch
in
button.
motion that we want to take a look at.
Reduce the motion. Reduce motion. Switch button.
And
Off.
reduce
Double
motion
tap to
is
toggle
one
setting.
of them. Much like reduce transparency and differentiate without colors are settings that you should listen for changes on in your app, you should also listen for changes on reduce motion if you have a lot of animations in your app. Now, reduce motion does exactly what it sounds like. It reduces the amount of motion in your app. So, for example, it might stop animations, or it might change
Screen
the
dim.
animation to a much less. It might change an animation to a different animation that is a little less hard on someone who might be prone to motion sickness or gets disoriented super easily or something like that, right? So keep that sort of stuff in mind.
Reduce the motion of the user interface, including the parallax effect of icons. When in low power, show vehicle motion cues. Switch button. Off. Double. Show vehicle motion cues.
Now, show vehicle motion cues. This is a new one. This is a new accessibility setting for iOS 18 and iPadOS 18. This basically puts 3 dots on your screen and moves them around based on the movement of your vehicle when vehicle movement is detected. This will help you with motion sickness, kind of keep you oriented.
Dots automatically appear near the edges of your iPhone screen when vehicle motion is detected. They follow the movement of the vehicle and may help reduce motion sickness. You can turn them on and off in Control Center. Learn more. Link. Dim flashing lights. Switch button. Off.
Now, dim flashing lights. This, I believe, was added in 2023. This allows you to dim, as it states, flashing lights in your video content. Because, for example, maybe someone has epilepsy, and if there's flashing lights that aren't dimmed to a certain degree, it may cause them to have a seizure, right? So we don't want that. So we want to be able to adapt our video content to help them more easily enjoy their content.
Video content that depicts repeated flashing or strobing lights will be automatically dimmed. The video timeline will display when flashing lights occur in the content for supported media. Autoplay animated images. Switch button. On.
Now,
Double tap to toggle
autoplay
setting.
animated images. This allows you to determine whether or not you want animated GIFs to play, right? Maybe you don't want them to play automatically, and you can turn this setting off.
Autoplay video previews. Switch button. Off.
Now, autoplay video previews. If you don't want video previews to play automatically, you can switch this setting
Autoplay message
as well.
effects. Control if videos. Autoplay message of
autoplay message effects. So if you don't want to automatically play message effects for whatever reason, if it gives you motion sickness or something like that, or maybe they're a bit too much, then that's fine. You can turn that off as well.
Control if prefer non-blinking cursor.
So again, you get the idea.
Accessibility. Back button. Accessibility. Spoken content. Audio. Motion. Button. Spoken content.
Now,
button.
The spoken content settings gives you various settings based on content that is spoken, exactly as it says. Nothing too serious in there,
Screen
really, that we need to take a look at immediately. I urge you to go and explore it if you would like.
Audio descriptions. On. Button.
Audio description. This setting allows blind or low vision users to have their TV shows and movies audibly described to them by a narrator. Now, this only works if the content supports audio description. So the content itself has to support it for this to work. If you're watching the Harry Potter series, or if you're watching Star Wars or something like that, and you have this enabled, audio descriptions are available on things like that. There are a lot of shows and movies available on like Apple TV and stuff like that that have audio description. So if you want to try that out for yourself to kind of see what that's like, by all means.
Physical and motor. Heading.
Now we have some settings for physical and motor
Touch.
impairments,
Button.
such as different touch settings,
Face ID and attention. Button.
different settings related to Face ID and attention. So maybe you can't directly, maybe there's some Face ID accommodations or attention accommodations that you might need because you can't, maybe you can't look at the Face ID sensors directly or something like that. Those kinds of settings are in here.
Switch control. Off. Button.
Now, if you use a switch device to control your phone, there is switch control here. So you can turn that on and use your switch device.
Voice control. Off. Button.
Now, voice control. What is voice control? I brought it up at least a few times.
Accessibility. Heading.
Before. Now, voice control is a way for you to control your phone using your voice. And inside of our apps, we have these things called accessibility input labels. Now, accessibility input labels are what the person speaks to activate a accessibility element in your app. So a button, a row in a list, or something like that. Those are typically done with different voice commands for voice control. And we'll talk a little bit about best practices for how we can create accessibility input labels in our apps when we actually start coding.
Screen dimmed.
But just know that we have to be very precise in what we ask the user to do, ask the user to say anyway. We can provide multiple ways of saying it, but we have to make sure that they're short and concise and all of that stuff. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Vision. Heading. VoiceOver. On. Button. Row 6 to 18 of 30. Hearing. Heading. Row 16 to 26. Row 6. Voice control. Side button. Button. Control nearby devices. Button.
Now there are, of course, other settings that you can use for motor and physical impairments, but I'm going to let you kind of explore those, and we're going to move on.
Hearing. Heading.
And hearing settings are pretty much ways for you to accommodate your device for hearing impairments such as hearing loss, deafness, stuff like that. For example, you can pair hearing aids with your phone. You could enable what's called music haptics. This is a brand new accessibility feature in iOS 18 that allows your phone to emit haptic feedback to the beat and rhythm of your music in Apple Music, which is really, really neat that is actually a feature. It really helps hard of hearing or deaf people enjoy music.
Screen dimmed.
Just like the rest of us.
Hearing device. Hearing controls. Sound recognition. RTT/TD. Audio and visual. Subtitles and captioning. Button.
So we also have subtitles and captioning.
Live captions. Button. Speech. Heading.
Live captions. Some speech
Live speech.
settings.
Off. Button.
Live speech.
Vocal shortcuts. Off. Button.
Vocal shortcuts.
Accessories. Heading.
There's all kinds of stuff we can do in here. But those are some of the highlights for the accessibility settings in iOS. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we will talk about the accessibility settings in watchOS.
Selected. Accept. Dark. Selected. Screen.